On a frozen trail in the dead of winter, a struggling cowboy pulled an unconscious woman from a snowdrift, never asking her name, never expecting anything in return. But when a letter arrived 2 weeks later revealing that she owned the largest cattle empire in the territory, his simple act of kindness became the key to a future he never dared to dream of. The wind screamed through Widow's Pass like a wounded animal, tearing across the narrow trail that snaked between towering pines and sheer rock faces. Snow fell in thick, blinding sheets, turning the world into nothing but white noise and unrelenting cold. Jesse Dalton hunched forward in his saddle, one gloved hand gripping the reins tightly, the other holding his coat collar pressed against his neck to keep out the biting wind. His horse, an old bay mare named Dust, picked her way carefully through the deep drifts, her ears pinned flat against her head in protest against the storm. Behind him, wrapped snugly in a thick wool blanket and strapped securely to the saddle, 8-year-old Tommy fought to keep his eyes open. The boy's small face was buried against his father's broad back, his arms locked in a fierce hug around Jesse's waist. Tommy hadn't uttered a single complaint all day. Not about the freezing cold that numbed his fingers and toes, not about the long, exhausting ride home from the town of Stillwater. He knew better than to whine. Winter in the Red Bluff territory was merciless, it didn't care about the discomfort of a man or a child. Survival meant enduring without question. Jesse had spent a grueling 14 hours at Harlow's livery stable in Stillwater, shoeing horses for ranch hands and mending broken wagon axles for travelers pushing through before the storm hit. His hands still throbbed from the hammering and prying, knuckles cracked and raw even through the thick leather gloves. The pay was meager, a few dollars and some barter for supplies, but it was enough to put beans and bacon on the table and keep a stack of firewood piled high by the cabin door. In Jesse's world, that was enough. It had to be. Dreams of more were luxuries for men with deeper pockets and fewer burdens. They were less than 3 miles from the warmth of home when Jesse spotted something odd off the trail, a dark shape slumped against the base of a wind-twisted pine tree. At first glance, in the swirling snow, he mistook it for a fallen branch or perhaps the carcass of a deer taken down by wolves. But as dust plodded closer, the shape sharpened into something far more troubling, a horse, black as midnight, its legs folded beneath it in exhaustion, head drooping low as if in defeat. And beside it, half buried in a deepening snowdrift, lay a human figure in a long, heavy coat. Jesse reined Dust to an abrupt halt, his stomach twisting with a mix of dread and urgency. "Stay put right here, Tommy," he said quietly but firmly, swinging down from the saddle into snow that reached midway up his calves. The boy nodded silently, pulling the blanket tighter around his shoulders, his wide eyes peering out from beneath his wool cap. Jesse approached cautiously, his boots crunching loudly in the otherwise muffled world. The black horse lifted its head weakly at his approach, warm steam puffing from its nostrils in ragged bursts. It was alive, but barely. Exhausted beyond measure, its coat crusted with ice. The figure beside it, however, showed no sign of movement. Dropping to one knee in the snow, Jesse brushed away layers of fresh powder from the person's shoulder and face. It was a woman, her lips pale blue, skin unnaturally waxy and cold to the touch, dark hair matted with ice crystals, eyes firmly closed. Her breathing was so shallow that Jesse had to lean close to detect it at all, a faint whisper against the howling wind. "Ma'am," he called, his voice steady but gentle as he shook her shoulder lightly. No response. Pulling off one glove despite the stinging cold, he pressed 2 calloused fingers to her neck, searching for a pulse. They're faint as a fluttering bird's wing, but present. Time was slipping away faster than the snow was falling. Jesse didn't pause to question who she was, where she'd come from, or why she was alone on this deadly trail in the heart of a blizzard. He didn't weigh the risks to himself or Tommy, or the extra miles it would add to their journey. He simply acted on instinct, the same instinct that had kept him and his son alive through hard years. Scooping her up in his strong arms, he lifted her limp body as carefully as he could, her head lolling against his shoulder. Carrying her back to Dust, who snorted nervously at the unfamiliar weight, Jesse shifted Tommy forward in the saddle to make room. He positioned the woman behind the boy, draping her unresponsive arms around Tommy's waist for stability. "Hold her hands tight, son," Jesse instructed, his tone leaving no room for fear. "Don't let go, no matter what." Tommy's eyes were wide with a mix of terror and determination, but he nodded bravely, his small, mittened hands clasping the woman's frozen fingers in his own. Jesse mounted up in front, took the reins in one hand, and urged Dust forward with a firm kick. The black horse let out a weak whinny, then staggered to its feet, following behind on shaky legs, too weary to bolt ahead, too loyal to its rider to be abandoned. The storm intensified as they pressed on, wind howling like a banshee, snow whipping horizontally into their faces. Jesse's jaw clenched tight against the cold and the growing weight pressing against Tommy's back. He could feel her slipping heavier, her body growing limper. She was fading fast, and he knew it with a cowboy's grim certainty. Almost there, he muttered through gritted teeth, unsure if the words were for Tommy, Dust, the woman, or himself. The cabin was just over the next ridge, a beacon of hope in this frozen hell. The world narrowed to the rhythmic crunch of hooves, the rasp of labored breathing, and the relentless assault of the storm. In Jesse Dalton's care was a complete stranger, a woman whose name he didn't know and might never learn if the cold claimed her. Yet Jesse, a man who owned little more than the clothes on his back, his horse, and his modest cabin, pushed harder into the blizzard, driven by nothing but the quiet conviction that leaving her would be wrong. At last, through the swirling white curtain, the faint outline of his cabin emerged like a miracle. It was humble. A single-room log structure he'd built with his own hands, featuring rough-hewn walls, a stone chimney that belched smoke on better days, and a slanted roof perpetually battling heavy snow loads. But in that moment, it was the most beautiful sight Jesse had ever seen, salvation from the storm. He dismounted swiftly, boots plunging deep into fresh drifts. Tommy was shivering violently now, his small body trembling, lips pressed into a thin line of bravery. Jesse reached up and carefully lifted the woman down, cradling her against his chest like something fragile and precious. She felt heavier than before, dead weight, her head falling limply to one side. Her breathing was barely detectable. He pressed his ear close to her mouth to confirm the faint warmth was still there. "Tommy, get that door open quick." The boy slid off Dust and scrambled ahead, tiny hands fumbling with the frozen latch until the door groaned open. A blessed gust of relatively warm air spilled out, carrying the faint scent of pine smoke and home. Jesse carried her inside and laid her gently on the narrow cot beside the fireplace. The morning's embers still glowed faintly beneath a layer of ash. He wasted no time, tossing on two thick logs and poking vigorously until flames leaped up, hungry and bright, casting dancing shadows across the small room. "Tommy, grab every blanket we've got, every single one." Already kneeling beside the woman, Jesse peeled off her soaked coat, heavy with melted snow and ice, then tugged off her boots. Her feet were alarmingly pale, tinged with gray, frostbite was taking hold. He worked with urgent efficiency, wrapping her legs in a heavy quilt, tucking thick wool blankets around her torso and shoulders. Tommy returned breathless, arms loaded with their meager collection, including the cherished patchwork quilt his late mother had sewn years ago before fever stole her away when Tommy was just a toddler. Jesse layered the blankets carefully, building a cocoon of warmth, then moved to the small cast-iron stove in the corner. He filled a dented kettle from the water bucket and set it to boil, the metallic clank echoing in the tense silence. His hands were shaking now. Not just from the cold that had seeped into his bones, but from a deeper fear, a crushing sense of responsibility. He'd patched up neighbors before, hauled drunks out of bar fights, fixed broken gear for strangers passing through. But this was different. This woman's life hung by the thinnest thread, and if it snapped, the weight of that failure would rest squarely on him. "Is she gonna die, Pa?" Tommy's voice was small, barely audible over the crackling fire, his eyes wide with unspoken terror. Jesse glanced back at his son standing there, snow still melting in his dark hair, face pale from cold and worry. Part of him wanted to offer empty reassurance, to promise the boy everything would be fine. But Jesse had never lied to Tommy, not about his mother's death, not about the hardships of their life, and he wouldn't start now. "I don't rightly know, son," he answered honestly, voice low and steady. "But we're gonna fight like hell to make sure she doesn't. We're gonna do everything we can." He poured steaming water into a tin cup, adding a generous pinch of dried mint leaves from a jar on the shelf, the closest thing they had to medicine. Kneeling again, he gently lifted the woman's head, cradling it in one hand while pressing the cup's rim to her blue lips. Most of the liquid dribbled uselessly down her chin, but a few precious drops slipped past, and he saw the faintest movement in her throat, a swallow. "That's it," he murmured encouragingly, as much to himself as to her. "Come on now, fight." Stay with us." Setting the cup aside, he took her icy hands in his and rubbed vigorously, trying to coax circulation back. Her fingers were stiff and unresponsive, like carved marble. Tommy crept closer, watching intently. "Can I help, Pa?" Jesse nodded without hesitation. "Keep that fire stoked high, son. Add kindling slow and steady, make it roar." Tommy moved to the hearth with purpose, his small hands surprisingly steady as he fed the flames. The fire grew brighter, hotter, filling the cabin with much-needed warmth and light. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, color began to return to the woman's cheeks, a faint pink flush against the previous deathly pallor. Her eyelids fluttered once, then twice. A soft, broken sound escaped her lips. Not words, just breath, but it was life asserting itself. Jesse let out a long, shaky exhale, a heavy weight lifting from his chest. She was still in the fight. He sat back on his heels, wiping sweat from his brow despite the lingering cold, and looked at Tommy. The boy gazed back with something akin to awe. "You did real good, son," Jesse said quietly, pride thickening his voice. Tommy managed a small, tired smile. "You too, Pa." As the evening deepened, the storm outside began to lose its fury, the wind's howl softening to a moan. Inside, the fire crackled steadily, casting a golden glow that made the small cabin feel almost sacred. Jesse sat in his old wooden chair by the hearth, elbows on knees, watching the woman's chest rise and fall with growing regularity. The color in her face was stronger now, like the first hint of dawn creeping over the mountains. Tommy sat cross-legged on the floor near the stove, stirring a pot of beans and salt pork that bubbled gently. He'd added extra water to stretch it, just as Jesse had taught him over countless similar nights. It wasn't gourmet, but it was hot and filling priorities in their world.